Molly Gebler.
Hi, Alex Kurtzberg.
You are under the weather today, yes?
I'm a little bit. Got hammered hard with the flu.
I heard that you were in bed for 3 days straight. Is that true?
That is totally true.
Not in a good way either.
No, I got up to go to the bathroom and get bananas.
Yeesh.
That was it. Yeah, that was it. But I did watch the Tonys last night, and I have to give a shout out to both my Casey and Corey Cott. Casey presented and Corey performed, and proud moment.
I did not watch the Tonys.
You missed.
I heard it was
Kevin
entertaining.
Spacey was very funny.
Yeah. He
was
came
really
out as
good.
the president.
Yeah,
right?
And then he came out as himself in House of Cards.
Well, right. He came out as
Right,
the
but he
president.
also came out as Bill Clinton once, and
Oh,
he
he
had
did?
come out and he had done a
Gotcha.
lot of whatever you call those.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Did you watch anything else besides the Tonys
I
while you were
didn't.
sick?
I didn't. I literally slept from I can't say the minute I woke up to the minute. We had the watch party on Friday. Go Cavs tonight. Oh, that might have to get cut. And we had the watch party on Friday and then went home, and that was the end of Molly.
Isn't it funny that by the time people hear this podcast, the Cavs are either going to be giant winners or not?
They are
right?
going to be.
And
yeah.
as of right now, we have no idea.
No, and you know what?
Something metaphysical
It's
about
not.
that.
It's just for our entertainment.
Right.
What did you do this weekend?
There
was so much going on. I mean, the Valley Art Center had their event, and there was a music crawl this weekend in Chagrin, and lots of stuff. So what did you do?
So, all right. So Friday afternoon was my law firm's quarterly play hooky day.
Oh.
And so I was a little under the weather this weekend myself for reasons that were more fun at the time, but a little bit more shameful than yours over the weekend. Yeah, so what happened was we went boating, and you know about our play hooky days, right?
I do. I get invited to them occasionally.
Yeah. We should have invited you to this one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I usually say no because I'm a decent employee.
Right. Yeah. No, I take the staff out for lunch, and then we usually go and do something fun. Like we go to Cedar Point or to the movies, or like we play Drunk Trivial Pursuit. Oh, yeah. You were part of that one.
Yeah.
That one will forever be known as Leprosi Day.
And for all of you who can't see, which are all of you, I'm flipping Alex off right now.
Oh, man. That is the best.
So you had a good boating day?
So, okay, so after our play hooky day, we went boating, and it was a little choppy out there, and some of us had a few cocktails too many, and there's Larry calling us. Who do we have with us today, Molly Gebler?
We have a legend.
We do have a legend.
An absolute legend who I fell in love with, I don't know, probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, I think now, is our friendship. And I think if he just says one thing, I think our guests are going to be able to tell exactly who it is without even a name. I kind of want to test that. Can we test that?
Well,
can he say something?
Is there like a catchphrase, or is there like when people stop you in the street and they say, "Hey, can you say that thing?"
Oh, maybe appropriate for today too.
The what?
Maybe something appropriate for today.
Oh, yes. Come on, Cavs. Gotta make it happen. Come on, Cavs. Gotta make it happen. Yes. As a matter of fact, the stations are playing it again, which is really nice.
And they brought it back last year for you,
They brought it back
too,
last
and you
year.
went to the game.
You know what's amazing is that song was written 40 years ago when I worked for Nick Maletti, who owned 3WE Radio, which is 1100, which is now TAM. But Nick came to me and he said, Larry, he said, you know, we now have the Cavaliers and I have the Coliseum, and I'd like to have you write a song for the Cavs. And I said, oh, that's great. And I had been writing jingles and had some great success doing that. And I had been writing songs, but I had not had anything that was, you know, popular at that time. So I sat down to write it, and he said, now, Larry said, I want it to be just as good as Sweet Georgia Brown that the Globetrotters have. And I said, oh, no pressure there. Right? I'll get right to it.
Sounds easy.
So I wrote it, and I remember sitting at the piano at home that evening, and all I started with was, come on, Cavs, gotta make it happen. Come on, Cavs, gotta make it happen. And then I got into the rhythm with that fast break action, gotta make it happen. Come on, Cavs. And here it is, 40 years later, they're still playing it. And last year was, as you mentioned, Molly, was a wonderful tribute. They called me and said, we're going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Miracle of Richfield. And I said, oh, isn't that wonderful? And they said, we'd like to have you perform the Cavaliers fight song live at halftime. Wow. And it's going to go viral, so don't worry about it. It'll be fun. And I said, well, that might be a problem because when I recorded it, I did it in New York with 22 musicians and 8 singers. Oh, and they said, oh, no, there's no way possible we can afford that. So why don't you just come up with a band? The only thing we can afford is 6 band members who sing, and myself. So there was 7 of us, and so that was it.
So you just pieced
that was
it
the beginning
together?
of it, and we did it live, and it was wonderful.
And folks, this is none other than Larry Morrow. I don't even think I don't have to even say, but the voice of Cleveland is who this is. We are honored to have you as our guest today.
Thanks for coming over, Larry.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with both of you.
Tons to share. Let's get right into it.
Now, how do you spell your first name?
Alex.
Just same as
Just like it
sounds. You're an Alexander.
Just like it sounds, and Molly is the same as Molly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's all phonetic.
Well, Molly and Alex, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me to come.
Thanks for coming, Larry.
Okay, the voice just gives me chills. I'm sorry.
I know.
Because I used to listen to him on it was 102.1. No.
Isn't that amazing how many people thought that I worked on WDOK 102.1, but I actually worked on Q104.
Okay.
104.1. Yes. And one of the great stories about that is I had Indians tickets, and it was the second row right behind the Indians dugout. And it was about the third inning, and the woman behind me says, by the way, I listen to you, Trapper Jack, every morning. And I said, oh, thank you. And I didn't let her on that she's got the wrong guy in the wrong station. And I turned around an inning later and I said, do you like 104? She said, oh, Trapper, I love listening to you on 104.1. So I let it go until the end of the game. And she said, could I have your autograph? And I knew that she was going to ask for that. So I said, sure. So I signed it, Larry Morrow, 104.1 FM, WQAL. She said, oh, my God, I'm so sorry.
But how sweet.
But it's amazing because we competed against each other, played the same music for many, many years. So 104 and 102.
Well, it was you that I listened
synchronized.
to.
Pardon?
It was your voice that I listened to.
Yes, thank you.
So, yes.
So can we talk about that voice for a second? Because my recollection, as I mentioned, I met you, Larry, at the Chagrin Valley Chambers State of the Schools meeting that you hosted. And my recollection was that at that meeting you told a story about how you developed your voice.
Yes.
Because it does not come naturally to you.
No, it did not. I was a bass singer in high school. And so I go in the Marine Corps. I get out of the Marine Corps, and I was in California. And I didn't want to come home. I'm born and raised in Detroit. I didn't want to come home. Once you have 3 years of palm trees and 78 degrees and sunshine every day, you are not heading back to Michigan, with the same kind of weather that Cleveland has. So my father got sick, and my mother said, sell everything and come home. So I did, and I went to work at General Motors. Anyone who lives in and around the Detroit area aspires at one day to work for the automobile companies. So I went to work for General Motors, and I thought, since I'm here, I might as well become the president. So I started to train myself to become the president. I took engineering courses, etc. And then one day I was driving home from the factory, driving to the factory, and I heard my favorite DJ by the name of Joel Sebastian, and I thought, I wonder what a DJ looks like. And in those days, they were gods. I mean, Wixie 1260 was really something, but that was now 10 years before that. So I drove over to see him, and I thought, he called himself the Swinging Spaniard. So I thought, well, the guy's going to be probably like me, dark hair, mustache, and the whole deal. I drive up, and he had his back to me. Now, I'm about 10 feet from him because he was in the window broadcasting. He got up, and he turned around. He was about 6'7", blonde hair and blue eyes. And I thought, that can't be that guy, Swinging Spaniard. But when I saw him, I said, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's the story. So now I go to radio school, the Detroit School of Announcing and Speech, and it was the most prestigious school at that time in America, announcing school. So I go through a whole year, and I thought, boy, I'm ready. I'm really ready. Now you have an interview with the two professors who run the school, and their simple little phrase to me was, don't even think about getting into the business because you will never make it.
Wow.
And
why? Why did they say that?
Well, they really teach you to speak out of your diaphragm. And I sounded like, hi, this is Larry Morrow. How nice to meet you. Everything was out of here.
That's how Molly sounds right now.
Yeah, about 98% of people speak right out of here, because they have not trained their voice. So I went to a voice teacher, and he said, you sound awful. He said, I can't believe that you've gone through a whole year at the school and you still sound that way. So he said, I'm gonna give you a little lesson, and I want you to work on it until you perfect it. He says, you really are blessed with a nice voice. You just haven't learned how to use it. So he said, hold your nose and give me the ABCs. I said, come on, Don, don't fool around. Come on, you're nuts. So he said, no, hold your nose and give me the ABCs. So I started with A, B. He said, there's your problem.
Talking through your nose.
Talking through your nose. And I said, well, doesn't everyone do that? He said, no. He said, so I want you to train yourself to go A, B, C. And then that was the beginning of getting the voice into the throat and then into the upper diaphragm and then finally out of the lower part of my stomach.
Now, can I ask you a question right there? Why didn't you just give up? I mean, you had the school telling you weren't going to make it. Don't even think of going into it. You had this voice teacher telling you you're doing it wrong. What made you say no? I at that time I had a singular purpose, and I knew what that purpose was, and I was not about to let them do that to me. And I knew that I was wrong. I thought, no wonder how these guys sound so good. They all have these beautiful voices, and they've trained them, and I have not trained mine. So, he basically said, you've worked hard, you have an obvious talent, you just have not adjusted yourself to what's really important about broadcasting. Okay.
So I remember my very first radio station, and I actually, it wasn't on the air. I just spun records for the DJ, and he even said to me one day, he says, "You're not gonna do it. You're not gonna make it." 2 years later, 2 years after he had made that comment, I was working in Detroit, the 5th largest market in America, which takes around 10 to 15 years to get there. Not only was I there in 2 years, but then I was voted Detroit's most popular DJ.
Wow.
That was my purpose.
And did you use those stepping stones as motivation to fling you forward?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never dwelled on that, of course, and I knew that that I was there too soon. I knew that I didn't belong in Detroit because when I would listen to all the DJs, I kept on thinking to myself, how come I'm not that good? These guys are really good. And because I was voted number one, it's because all the teenagers voted. Okay. And I was their guy. So,
okay.
So that was the beginning.
Teenagers,
they
rule the world, those teenagers.
Larry, let's when you say you knew that was your purpose, mm-hmm. right? Is that a feeling that you have? Is it just something that you knew that you were aspiring to and you would work hard for? Was it a role model? Was it something else? Was it a voice that, spoke? I'm curious how one. I'm always curious about how one arrives at their purpose in general, right? And that's, mm-hmm. Arguably one of the things that that this podcast is about. But how did you know it was your purpose, and how did you get there? What was the road?
Yeah, Alex, I just think it's something you feel. I no longer looked in the rearview mirror and said, I'm not going to do that. I thought, I really want to be good. I wanted to be a really good DJ. But there was also a part of me that I thought that I have such a long way to go because I'm not sure that I can be as good as these guys. Again, They had been there 10 to 15 years already, and I've been on the air for 2. And so I knew I had a long way to go, not in terms of diction, but just in terms of being really good on the air, being relaxed and communicating well. And even though I thought I did that, I knew I had a long way to go. But that was it, and I knew that this was it for me.
And you were a DJ for decades, right?
Yes, 40 years.
40 years.
Well, actually longer, 40 years in Cleveland, and probably 45 before I got here. Almost 50.
Wow.
Almost 50 years.
That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of history right there, right? Yeah. I mean, I wonder, like sometimes I wonder, what I would do if I was broadcasting like during 9/11, I remember I was listening to Howard Stern during 9/11, not during, but like over the next couple days. And I remember thinking, I wonder if he's thinking how momentous it is, that everyone's like kind of listening to him and looking to him to say something meaningful and important and make sense of it all. You probably had a lot of those moments, I imagine.
I did. And I don't think you ever forget that you're selling a vision. And my vision, of course, when I got to Cleveland, and I must back up to tell you, this wasn't 9/11 in Cleveland, but it was Cleveland's 9/11. I arrived in July on the day they were burning the city down.
Wow.
The Huff riots. And
that's
so
68?
Pardon?
1968?
66.
66.
So
okay.
68 was the Glenville riots.
Okay.
Similar to that. So in 1966, I'm driving down 77, and I thought, the flats look, the terrible smell coming out of the flats and stuff. I just thought it smelled awful. You could smell the sulfur, and I said, I don't want to be here. I'll do the interview, but I don't think I want to step in Cleveland. Besides, Detroit was the 5th largest radio and television market in America. Cleveland at that time was the 8th. So normally you step up in markets, not down. And so I thought, I'm not going to spend any time here anyway. So, but I didn't know what was going on. So I get into my hotel room, and the hotel room was on 77, right where they have the Goodyear sign, which is that Goodyear sign is no longer there. So I'm in my hotel room, and I turn on the television. In those days, you only got 3, 5, and 8. I turned on Channel 3, and I said, I don't like that movie. It's, the blacks are fighting the whites and police and stuff. So I turned on the 5, and I thought, that's unusual, that the same movie would be playing on the same, the different channels. So then I turned on 8, and because I'm a slow learner, I realized what was going on. And wow. I said, now I know I don't want to be here. So I interviewed, but at the same time, you can't be known as a floater in the business. If you work at a radio station, you need to stay there for a few years, and then you need to move up. If you are staying, like if I'm working in Cleveland and I've been there for 2 or 3 years, and then my next trip is Canton, that's okay. But if my next trip is New York or Chicago or L.A., that's not okay. You need to be there for some time. So I knew I had to stay. And to really be honest with you, the moment I got here, I fell in love with the people of Cleveland and never wanted to leave. And I had a sign on my door that said, Cleveland, Ohio is the greatest city in America to live, work, play, and raise a family. And I decided to stay and make that happen. That was my vision. That's the vision that I wanted to sell. And I wanted to reach the hearts of people. I knew that there were several people that were way ahead of me at that time. Wixie 1260 was brand new. It was an AM station. We were small. We were only 5,000 watts. And within 2 years, we're not only the #1 station in Cleveland, we have the highest ratings in America.
Wow. You made a difference there, huh?
So that was it.
And are you spinning records the entire time, or you're doing a morning show, you're doing news?
No, I'm on from 9 till noon. Then they stretched when the ratings came out, we did well. They stretched my time from 10 till 3. So yeah, I did middays, and I stayed there in middays for 5-6 years.
Spinning records.
Okay. Yeah, spinning 20 records an hour. But they were all short songs. They were 2-minute songs, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and all that ilk, and it was wonderful. It was great.
Did you, was it always spinning records, or did you do any other kind of radio?
Well, you did an interview show. It was called Project 1260, which was an interview program, public service program that radio stations have to do. You have to give so much time to public service over a period of a week. And so I did a half-hour program called Project 1260. And that, again, was something else that I wasn't ready for, that I thought, you know what? This is not bad interviewer.
Okay.
This is going to be kind of fun. And then all of a sudden I'm interviewing really important people. Important people, you know. First of all, they were musicians. And then because I was very involved in the community, then it became the mayor and then the governor. And I had to work hard for those interviews. And I thought, this is really fun. And not realizing that one day that's all I would do, would be interviewing people.
Do any of them stand out?
Yes. When Pete, and I'm asked all the time, Larry, you did hundreds, maybe thousands of interviews. How many stand out? And I always say that probably the best interview is Telly Savalas.
My favorite story.
Telly Savalas, and then Barbara Walters. And you know, I interviewed, I introduced 4 presidents. I introduced Reagan twice, so 5 presidents of the United States. And I'll get into that story later, but it was really wonderful. Telly Savalas, I was told by my friend, who was the promotion man for Decca Records, and Decca Records at that time was one of the biggest labels in the world. And on that label was The Who and people like that. So he said, now, Larry, Telly Savalas is coming in town, and Telly at the time had the #1 show. And it was Kojak. And so, and in that show, he was trying to stop smoking, so he always had a sucker in his mouth. And so my friend came to me, his name was Pete Gideon, and he said, Larry, he said, we have an album out called Kojak. I'm the one who loves you, baby. That was his favorite phrase. And he said, he's coming in town. He's only going to do 1 radio and 1 television, and I want you to be the radio interview. But I must tell you, do your homework, because he's an intellectual, and if he's not happy with the interview, he gets up and leaves.
Wow.
He walks out. And so now I'm really nervous.
That's not intimidating at all.
Oh, no. And now, on top of that, Alex and Molly, I'm thinking, he's 6'4". I'm 5'8". And so I got this terrible image of this guy really much bigger. He's an intellectual. And I'm thinking, well, I better do my homework. So I knew every movie. I knew everything about him. So in my homework, I must tell you that I had a relationship with Paul Anka. Paul Anka was also a very good friend of Telly Savalas. So now Telly comes in, and I'm looking out over the second-story window, and I see him get out of the limousine. I see that bald head, and I'm thinking, oh, no, man, here he comes. And I'm just so nervous. And so he walks in, but when he walks in, I was really surprised. Maybe 5'5".
Oh.
So from 6'4" to 5'5".
You have a wild imagination.
So now I'm taller than the guy, right? I said, what a little dude he is. So then, on top of that, I had the entire staff, maybe about 30 people, all with a sucker in their mouth. He loved it. Now he sits down, and he gets real serious. I see that serious look on his face. And I said, Telly, can I tell you something? We have a lot in common. He said, oh, we do? I said, yes. I said, number one, you're Greek, but your mother is Syrian and was born and raised in Aleppo, Syria. And I said, and you're dear friends with Paul Anka? He said, yes. I said, Paul Anka's father was Italian, but his mother was born in Aleppo, Syria. I'm French. My father was born in Quebec. My mother was born in Aleppo, Syria. He said, get up. I got up. He gave me a big hug. He said, we're family.
That's crazy.
The interview couldn't have gone better.
Wow.
I knew every character that he played in every movie. And when I said, we've been talking for an hour, he said, what? He said, we got more stuff to talk about.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
That is
So that,
cool.
and then, of course, Barbara Walters was really special. When I met Barbara was probably 48, 49, and maybe the most talked about female in America. The Barbara Walters show, and she did the Today Show for a long period of time, and she was just unbelievable. She walked in the green room at the Front Row Theater, and I'm waiting for her, and there's just the two of us in that room, and I'm getting ready to interview her, and she walks in, and I said, oh my gosh, that's Barbara Walters. Of course, these are my early days, and I'm very impressed with that kind of stuff. And so she says, Larry, hang on a second. I have to make a call to my office in New York, and then I'll be right with you. So she makes this 30-second call to New York, and then she sits down And she said, okay, let's do the interview. But before we do it, tell me about you. Were you married? I said, yes. She says, tell me about your wife. I said, Barbara, we only have about 5 minutes. I want to do this interview with you. She said, that'll come later. Don't worry about that.
Oh, my gosh. So that
Loved
made
her.
you feel comfortable.
Yeah, loved her.
I feel like we glossed over the Vietnam years. You were in Vietnam, right?
I was.
Right.
I was in the Marine Corps from 1956 through 59. And when I was in the Marine Corps, my MOS was 2500, which meant artillery. So I was in artillery where we would fire the great big guns, the 105 big gun, 155 howitzers, etc. And then they give you their own IQ test. The Marine Corps does their own IQ test. So if you go in the Marine Corps and you say, well, this is my IQ from high school, they don't believe it.
I think you're a former Marine right here.
Army.
Oh,
Okay.
darn it.
Yeah.
So
Don't offend Larry.
So
Marines take that very seriously. Although I do know what MOS means.
yeah, okay, yeah.
Military Occupational Specialty.
That's
Model,
right.
In case you were wondering.
So my MOS was 2500 artillery, and then one day they said, Larry, call me in, and he said, Larry, just want you to know that you tested the highest in the platoon. And I'm thinking, you have to have the wrong guy. You know, I went to a Catholic school for 12 years, and I went away to be a priest. You have to have the wrong guy. And he said, no, you tested the highest in the platoon, so we're putting you in what we call S3. S1 was like motor pool, the trucks, the cars. S2 was something else. S3 was intelligence, and I can't remember what S4 was. And I said, well, isn't S3 intelligence? Said, yes. And there was a disconnect right there. So he said, no. He said, out of the 84 men, you tested the highest. So we're moving you into S3. And what I did was in S3 was my job was every year we would pick a certain part of the government to fight against. Like in 1956, we fought against the Army. So the Navy and the Air Force was our partner. The next year, we fought against the Navy, and the Army was our partner.
What does that mean? You fought against?
Well,
like
we would go into war with them. No one would, you wouldn't shoot anybody. No one had any weapons, but they would say, for instance, Alex, if I have my back to you, and you're the Army, and you've said all of a sudden you're dead, that meant that I was dead. I was now captured by the Army. In other words, I was captured by the enemy. So every year we would play war, and for 30 straight days we would play war against whoever it was.
That is awesome.
So my job was to get us into the war. How to write up a report on how, Larry, you pick your committee, and we're going to go to the war against the Army this year. Why should we go into the war? How do we stay in the war? And then the strategy on getting us out of the war. That was my job.
So this was like war game training, like strategy,
Yes.
and I got it. So your job was to win against the other branches in this war game,
Correct.
Competition, I guess, right? Interesting.
Wasn't for fun.
Yeah, it was for fun, but it was serious.
But yeah.
I mean, if you didn't do the right thing, you were in trouble.
Right.
So now we fast forward. I got out in 1959. In 1969, I'm working at Wixie 1260. And our entire audience is young people at that time, and we're trying to find a way to connect with adults. And so our program director, Bill Sherrard, called me, and he says, we got a great idea, Larry. There are 200 Clevelanders in Vietnam, and we'd like to have you go over there and interview them. Bring the interviews home, and we'll play them on the air for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that will then connect us with the adult audience. And I thought, I don't want to go to Vietnam. It was really a bad place at that time. So he said, we're going to try to get, will you go? And I said, of course I'll go. And I know, at that time I knew, there's no way possible you're going to get me to Vietnam. Because at that time, it was the first time a war had been played out on television, and it wasn't good.
Right.
That's why Vietnam became that ugly war, and people, when our soldiers came home from Vietnam, you may recall, they spat on them. It was terrible. It was an awful war. And so we went to our congressman, we went to the governor, we went everywhere we could, and we got turned down. So one day, I get a call from the Pentagon. Is this Lawrence Morrow? Well, who called me Lawrence? No one.
Your parents.
Yeah, my parents, my mom and dad. Is this Lawrence? And no, is this Lawrence D. Morrow? Yes. I said, nobody calls me Lawrence. Who could this be? Well, this is Colonel Melton calling from the Pentagon, Lawrence. And I said, Colonel Melton, I don't even know if it's really you, but could we start on a first-name basis? Could you please call me Larry? He said, okay, Larry. So he said, President Nixon wants to know how we can get out of this war. And so we'd like to send you, along with a writer from Life magazine and a film crew from WFIL in Philadelphia, to Vietnam. And we'd like to have you interview every officer and every person that you run into. We're gonna make sure that you get all your Cleveland area kids. But at that time, you're going to be around a lot of officers, and we're going to give you a different rank than what you got out of the Marine Corps. And so your papers will be forthcoming, and you'll be going to Vietnam soon.
Wow.
So I get these papers, and they're mailed to Major Lawrence D. Morrow. So I call the Pentagon back right away. I said, may I speak with Colonel Melton? He says, no, he's back to Vietnam. I said, they've made a terrible mistake. I've gone from a corporal, an enlisted man, up to an officer. Not only an officer, a big-time officer. They skipped first and second lieutenant. They skipped everybody but a colonel. So they skipped major. So here I am. I get the papers, Major Lawrence D. Morrow. So I was on my way to Vietnam, and when I got there, I interviewed all of our kids, and I asked them one question. How do you feel about the war? And then I was to make that confidential report back to the Pentagon, which I did. And it was interesting. Probably 100% of the officers that I interviewed said, what are we doing here? This is a terrible war. And about 80% of all the enlisted men that I interviewed said, red, white, and blue all the way. Let's go get him. Let's go kill him. And it was very, very interesting. That was my report. So that was my story about Vietnam. I spent about a month there, brought the interviews home. Bill Hickey put them on the front page of the Plain Dealer. I would, the interview with Molly is going to run at Saturday at 2:00. The interview with Alex will run at 3:00. And I took every cassette that I recorded, send it to their parents. We played those interviews Thanksgiving and Christmas. Wixie went from let's say on a scale of 1 to 20 or 1 to 100. We were at 20%. We went to 100% overnight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 questions. Did you have a choice? Could you not go? Could you have told them?
I could have not gone.
Okay.
But it was, oh, no, we were into it. I was really into it at that time.
And can we hear these tapes? Like, can you find them anywhere?
Very interesting. You all know the name Jim Brocious.
Yes.
Jim Brocious was the chief of police here for, 20-some years?
Yes.
I have written a song called "The Gift of America." I wrote it back in 2005 to salute our veterans, and it made its way to New York. And Shania Twain wanted to record the song, and so I went to New York and met with Shania Twain's manager, and we decided that the war was so bad that we would hold on to the song. But Jim Brocious had a daughter who sang, so I told Jim about the song. He says, I have a daughter who sings, Larry. I'll bring her down, and you can teach her the song. I said, fine. And Jim says, Larry, were you in Vietnam? I said, yes. And he said, well, when I was in Vietnam, some guy from Cleveland interviewed me, and they played the interview over the phone, over the air, and my mom and dad listened to it. And I said, Jim, that was me. You and I interviewed you. He said, of course you did. He's got the only cassette that I'm aware of.
Wow.
Where'd the rest of them go?
Well, you see, he said it.
Well, over a period of time.
Oh, all the originals went to the parents.
Yeah, all the originals went to the parents.
I thought maybe.
And there's probably, Alex, there's probably a master tape somewhere.
Yeah, I would think.
But I don't know who has that.
Wow.
And then at some point, and I'm going to go through this list quickly, right? Because if not, we're going to be here all day.
And then do you promise me that we could dive into just some of his interviews, because he's interviewed some incredible people. Yeah. Well,
here's what I want to do. I'm going to go through the list and then. Note your favorites, Larry and Molly, right? Okay. Elizabeth Dole, Drew Carey, Joan London, Zig Ziglar, George Voinovich, Neil Diamond.
Yeah.
I already know who Molly's favorite. Senator Pat Moynihan, David Brinkley, Ronald Reagan, Helen Thomas, Barb Walters, Jimmy Carter, John Glenn, Casey Kasem, Telly Savalas, George Bush, Arnold Palmer, Bill Cosby, Paul Harvey, Tony Bennett. Yeah. And then... Did I name all the presidents?
Those are some of my favorites, yeah. That you did mention.
Some of the
Were
favorites.
all the presidents in there?
Huh?
The name of it, yeah.
President
Carter, Bush, Reagan.
Yes.
Bush. I think it was Bush, yes?
Yes. It was President Bush twice. Yes.
And then you were named you were given the Mr. Cleveland Award.
Yes.
Oh, no, I did miss out. The presidents are Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and Bill Clinton. Four presidents.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then you hosted Cleveland's bicentennial to the largest crowd ever assembled in downtown Cleveland.
At that time.
At that time. Since then, I think the Cavs last year might have been
someone asked me, so how do you feel about the fact that when you introduced President Clinton and you hosted that wonderful event, there were 450,000 people assembled, which is the largest crowd ever at that time. Until the Cavs.
Right.
Which is okay with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Wrote the Smuckers jingle, inducted to the Radio and Television Hall of Fame. Was on the 100th episode of Drew Carey. DJ of the Year, 1970. Had to be more than that. Can you only get it once and then you're done, like the Tonys? DJ of the
Year?
You
could have won more. I was very fortunate. If you won a Clio, it's like winning an Academy Award. It's the biggest award in advertising. Yeah. When you win that, the chances of winning more are like winning an Academy Award. I mean, how often are you going to do that where you're going to write something special? The Smuckers jingle was so special because Smuckers at that time was getting ready to launch Smuckers nationally on the Today Tonight Show package, they called it, on NBC. And so it's a really wonderful story because I had gotten a call from Dave London. Dave was the creative director at Wise Advertising, at that time the largest agency in Cleveland. And what I didn't know is that they had gone to New York and met with probably 4 or 5 different companies out of New York, and Smuckers turned down every single jingle. So now Dave London comes to me and he said, I know you haven't done anything big. And I said, well, I have. I did, General Motors when I was 14, GM Mark of Excellence. And he said, well, you were 14. You're not 14 anymore. And he said, so I want you to go home and write a jingle for Smuckers. And I said, well, I'd like to go in the studio. Could you give me some money to do it? And he said, no, go home and write it and bring it back on a cassette. So I go home and I called my buddy Jerry Tiffy, who is probably the biggest singer in Las Vegas these days. But anyway, I called Jerry and he said, Jerry, why don't you come on over? And I said, I've written this jingle for Smuckers. And I want you to record it and we'll put it on a cassette and I'm going to take it to Smuckers tomorrow. So he comes over and he records it. And I called a friend of mine who was in the ad business and I said, I just want to be sure about this thing. This is a neat piece of music. She heard it. She said, I want to tell you something. And not only will they buy it, you will win a Clio.
Wow.
I said, well, that's a long way to go. First of all, I got to present it. Hopefully they're going to like it. So I took it to Dave the next day, and I was so excited about it. I went out and got a sheet cake. And I put, with a name like Smuckers, it has to be good. And I put a jar of jelly right in the middle of the sheet cake, took all the jelly out, and put the cassette in the jelly jar.
Oh, my
And so they took it out and played it, and Dave listened to it, and he said, I like it. I mean, I really like it. And so he called Lois Wise in. And Lois, of course, had written, with a name like Smuckers, it has to be good. And she said, oh, my God, we found it. She said, get a hold of Mark. Mark was the salesman on the account, her husband. Mark came in and he heard it. He said, I'm on my way to Orville. He said to Smuckers. And then they called me and he said, Larry, congratulations. We're going to use your jingle for the launching of the program. So that was the good news. Here comes the bad news. So I didn't know what to charge. I had been charging to a jingle $1,000, $1,500. The creative fee would be $250, maybe $300 at that time. And so I called a friend of mine and I said, what do I charge? This is a national jingle.
It's a Clio award-winning jingle.
And he said, call this guy in New York who used to be in Cleveland. He wrote the entire with a name like not with a name, with the Budweiser campaign. When you say Bud, you've said it all. So call him. So I called him, and he said, oh, I know who you are. He said, I'm born and raised in Cleveland. And he said, Larry, I'm telling you, here's the creative fee, not a penny less, $20,000.
Wow.
So now
It's a lot of scratch back then,
I thought,
too.
how do I go from $350 to $20,000? So I called Dave London. He said, Larry said, did you come up with a fee for the creative fee? And I said, yes. And I said, I've spoken to some people in New York. He said, all I want to know is what you're going to charge. I said, $20,000 creative fee. He said, $20,000 creative fee to do for a guy who's never written a national jingle other than when you were 14. I said, yes. Click goes the phone.
Oh.
So I called him back. I said, Dave, something happened to the line. You hung up on me. He said, isn't this the guy that charges $20,000 creative fee to write a jingle? I said, yeah. He slams it down again. So I went to him. I drove down and I said, Dave, what's going on? He said, here's the deal. He said, what you didn't know is we spent a fortune getting all these jingle companies out of New York to write it, and they all failed. So we don't have any more money. So they ate up your $20,000. He said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you $2,000 to write it. And he said, and then I'm going to do something really special for you. The voice of Smuckers was a very special voice. And I'm trying to think of his name. But anyway, when he would say, with a name like Schmuckers, it has to be good. And so he said, I'm going to have that guy do a promotion for you, a 1-minute piece over the Smuckers jingle, talking about all the good things about you. So he came on, he said, let me tell you about Morrow's Music Machine. And when you heard his voice, you knew who it was. He was like the voice of God. That was the beginning. And that year, after Smuckers came out, I did 5 national jingles.
Wow, name them.
Smuckers was the first one. Then came B.F. Goodrich. Following B.F. Goodrich was the orange drink out of Denver.
Tang?
Orange Crush.
Orange Crush.
Yeah,
Ooh.
Orange Crush.
Had a lot of those.
And then on and on and on. It just kept on coming.
Wow.
Can I ask a really sacrilegious question here?
Sure.
Oh, boy.
Well, how does the Smuckers jingle go?
With a name like Smuckers, you know, it has to be good. It has to be good.
Okay.
And they used it for 12
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then
Crazy.
did we also gloss right over when you were 14 and wrote the GM
Yeah,
jingle?
I don't even remember
I believe
seeing
that. I think that. I
anywhere.
believe that story is in my book. My mother told me that she said, "Honey, you know, every time I talk to you, or whenever I hear you doing things, you're whistling songs I've never heard before, or whistling tunes." And so she said, "Maybe you're going to be a writer." I said, "Oh, Mom, come on. I'm 14 at the time. All I have on my mind is football, basketball, baseball, and this cheerleader that I really like." So she saw an ad in the paper, and I live in Pontiac, Michigan, which is about 30 miles out of Detroit. It's north of Detroit. And she said, there's an ad here in the paper. And she said, it says they're looking for a jingle writer. I said, what's a jingle? She said, well, you know, they write these songs, for these 1-minute songs for, and I said, oh, yeah, I know that. She said, why don't you go down, they're looking for jingle writers, here's the address, why don't you take a bus down?
Oh, my God.
Down there and just meet with them. I said, okay, and I wasn't afraid of anything. So I took the bus. Are you ready for the bus? Talk about being sacrilegious. The bus was a nickel. That people know how old I am now. Okay, folks, I'm 130. So
Not true.
So anyway, so I take a bus down to Detroit, and I get off right there at the studio. I walk in. Can't remember the name of the studio, but I walk in, and the secretary said, what are you doing here? And I said, I saw this ad, and I said, I'm a jingle writer. She said, you are? She said, and she must have known, what's this little 14-year-old kid's doing here? So she went out and got the owner. The owner came out and he said, what can I do for you, son? And I said, my mother said I'm a jingle writer. And he said, well, can you tell me what you've written? I said, nothing. He said, well, why don't you do this? He took me into a room, and he said, here's what we do. We write slogans, and I'm going to give you 4 or 5 slogans, and I'm going to turn on the tape recorder, and why don't you write a piece of music or sing a piece of music to each of these slogans, and I'll come back in about 15 minutes. Is that okay with you? And I said, sure. I wasn't afraid at all. One of them happened to be GM Mark of Excellence. So he comes back, and he hears it, and he says, you know what? I like this one. I really like this one. And he said, the other ones I'm not so sure about, but this one I really like. So as I'm leaving, he said, I'll be right back. He gives me a check for $15.
Oh, my
Now, the bus was a nickel, so $15 is a lot of money.
Yes.
So I gave me a check for $15. I put the check in my shoe. I was afraid that it might fall out of my pocket. So I put the check in my shoe, take it back, and the next thing I know is that within maybe 3 or 4 months later, we're listening on the radio, and all of a sudden we hear GM Mark of Excellence, and it became their jingle for at least 25 years.
Wow. Gosh. All because his mother believed in him.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Neil Diamond. You know, I have to throw that out there.
Yeah.
He's my favorite. I just saw him recently.
So who?
Neil Diamond.
Oh, yes.
I love him. Tell me more about him.
Wixie 1260 decided to they wanted to give back to the audience because the ratings were so good. In maybe about 2.5 years. I mean, really, really good. A big-time rating today would be 7-8% of the audience, you know. I had 50 shares.
Wow.
And at one point had an 80 share, which I don't think has ever been duplicated at all. So anyway, we're going to have a Wixie 1260 Appreciation Day at Geauga Lake. Actually, the first one was at Chippewa Lake, but I believe the one that we're talking about was at Geauga Lake. And we're inviting this guy, and we invited several artists to come in, you know, all the Motown people. And these were artists that when your radio station played your song, especially in Cleveland, because Cleveland was known for what we called breaking songs. If it was a hit in Cleveland, it's going to be a hit all over America because of the melting pot of everybody here. So Cleveland was big time. So we had an Appreciation Day. We had about 8 or 9 artists, and then we had this guy by the name of Neil Diamond who only had out a hit that was a West Coast hit called Solitary Man. So and all of a sudden someone said, "Oh my God, we forgot to pick up Neil Diamond. Someone's got to go get him." And I had a wagon at that time. So I go out and pick up Neil Diamond at the airport. We put his drum set on top of my wagon.
Oh my
Neil Diamond sits in the car with me with his guitar between his legs, and the guys are sitting in the rest part of the wagon. So then I take Neil Diamond back, and then we became kind of pals at that time, and because he needs exposure, and I know that I have a star, and because he that day he said, "I'm going to sing my new song," and he said it isn't been released yet. It's called Cherry Cherry, which turned out to be his first big million-selling song. So that was the story of Neil Diamond. Then we became interview pals. And when he would come into town, when he came into town to perform at a public hall, at that time there was no Coliseum, so 10,000 people, I interviewed him and I introduced him and stuff like that. So we were pals. And then the picture that I have in my book, and it's also on my website, I believe, is my picture with Rosary and Neil Diamond and myself. And then the last time he came in town, which is probably somewhere in the 70s at the Coliseum, and he asked that I introduce him again, and that's the picture that you see. We were backstage. So that was Neil Diamond. Great story. Yeah.
All right, we have to move on to the lightning round questions. Right?
He promises, Larry promises to come back for
Right.
podcast number 2. Because
Yes.
there's just too much.
Right. We'll have to have a sequel.
I'll do whatever you want. No, I'm fine.
This is why I love him.
Okay.
All right. Lightning round questions are biggest success. What is it?
Life is about moments, and when I came to Cleveland, I didn't care much about all the notoriety that I had gotten. I really didn't care much about that, and I thought, boy, I was number 1 in CKLW in Detroit, and now I've become number 1 in Cleveland with big numbers, and now I've become one of the top 12 in America. That didn't do much for me. You know what I mean? I was glad. I was really glad that it happened. But I was, to everyone else, I was just Larry, and that's all I wanted to be. What I really wanted to do is, because I came here during the Huff riots, was to turn Cleveland around. So I had this sign on my door at Wixie 1260 that Cleveland, Ohio was the greatest city in America to live, work, play, and raise a family. And when that happened, when all of a sudden we went from being the worst city in America, with being burned down twice in 66 and 68 with the riots, to when George Voinovich became mayor in 1979 through 1989, we became one of the great cities in America 5 times in a row. and I was on the Voinovich team.
Yeah. Okay, Larry, biggest failure.
Oh, I hate to talk about this, but it's really not a failure. But in 1996, Casey Kasem came to town. And a guy by the name of Avery Friedman, who is one of my dearest friends in the world.
He's an attorney.
Yeah. I mean, we're very, very close. We talk on the phone every single day, and he's a very close friend. He called me, and he said, it was the day of the opening of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Casey, he said, Larry, he said, this is Avery Friedman. I mean, I knew the name, but I didn't know much about him. I knew it was a popular name. He said, I have Casey Kasem, and he was best friends with Casey. He said, I'd like to bring him over for an interview. So he brings him over, and I interview him for an hour. I had him for 1 hour. At the end of the interview, it went so well because we had the Lebanese thing going on, the Middle Eastern thing going on, and we're both DJs. And so at the end of the interview, I said, Casey, congratulations. I said, you've now been inducted into the most prestigious Hall of Fame in America, the National Radio Hall of Fame in Chicago. And he said, Larry, one day you too will be in that National Radio Hall of Fame. No, he said, you too will be nominated and inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame. And I said, yes, from your lips to God's ears. 6 months later, I run into Avery Friedman on the street, and he says, could you come to my office? And I said, yes. He said, Casey Kasem, when he left your studio, said it was the best interview he ever had. And I thought, well, wasn't that nice? I said, I was really touched by that. And he said, and Casey wants to have a relationship with you. You know, the fact that you two guys come from the same part of town, the same heritage, etc. And so Casey and I then became pals. And then all I know then, he says, that we are working to get you nominated to the National Radio Hall of Fame. And you had to send in 30 years of your work. And it had to be a tape that was not less than 20 minutes. I mean, not more than 20 minutes, but not less than 19.
Wow.
So 30, I put together
30 years worth?
Yeah, 30 years to get nominated. So the next thing I know is that I get a note in the mail. Avery calls me, says, could you come to my office? And I said, yes. He said, I just want you to know that you've been nominated to the National Radio Hall of Fame in Chicago. And which meant that I was the first broadcaster in the history of Ohio to be nominated to the National Radio Hall of Fame. And in those days, the rules were that 5 would be nominated from around America, but only 1 would get in. Today, I believe 10 are nominated and they all get in.
Oh.
So I was nominated but didn't get in.
Oh.
But now, had I been nominated today,
you would be in.
I would be in it.
I love how Avery Friedman's always telling you to go to his office. He can't just tell you these things over the phone. Larry, come to my office.
Yeah. So.
All right. Molly, do you want to ask your lightning round question?
Well, first of all, since you've done a whole interview hour and such with us, anything other than my stuffiness in my interviewing talents, but anything that you could give to Alex and I to make sure that we're interviewing properly, any quick little tidbit of how to interview properly?
Yeah,
words of advice?
That's really simple. That's really simple. I think that if you find someone that you really want to interview that's really special, you know, go after their part of their personal life, things that they love the most. And it could be and I can tell you what it's going to be right now.
Well,
it'll be their spouse, it'll be their children, it'll be the accomplishments of their children, or whatever the case might be. And I don't believe that I've ever done an interview. Of course I have. But what I would consider really good interviews without knowing something really special about them that would touch their heart. And it was the best thing in the world for me. I was now tethered to the hearts of Clevelanders.
Well, I know what touches your heart. It's your wife, Rosary.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Your girls, for sure.
And we're coming up now on her 20th anniversary. July 7th will be the 20th anniversary of Rosary surviving pancreatic cancer. And we actually on the way to the hospital down at the Cleveland Clinic for surgery, we didn't know whether she was going to live or die.
Wow.
And nor did she. And I could, when when we were driving, she was looking around, and I, without saying anything to her, I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking, "Is this the last time I'm going to drive down South Woodland? Is the last time I'm going to see these trees?" So we are blessed. Yeah, my darling wife, and we're going to celebrate. We'll be married 44 years this summer. And what's really neat about that marriage, not only that I adored her so much, is that Rosary had 3 young children when I met her. On a blind date, I went to visit my brother in Virginia Beach, and when he got there, my sister-in-law said, "I got a girl that I'd like to have you meet, and she's a nurse, and I'd like to have you meet her." And I said, "No girls." I really don't want a date. I've just come to visit. I'm going to be here for a week, but please, no girls. My brother said, "Well, you know what? We do have this friend. Her name is Rosary. She's got 3 little girls. She's divorced, and it would really be nice. She's a hairstylist, and it would really be nice if the 4 of us went to dinner." And I said, "Well, that sounds really good too." So when I went over to pick her up, I couldn't believe it. I said, "You have these 3 little girls. You're raising these 3 little girls on," I didn't say this, but on a hairstylist pay? And so that was September 23rd of 1973. I didn't see her again until her birthday in February of 1974. The second time I laid my eyes on her. It was it. I begged her. I said, "I want you to marry me. I want you to come to Cleveland, Ohio." And I said, "I'll take care of the children." And so now all 3 of our daughters all live in Chagrin.
Yes, they do.
For 44 years now.
Wow.
What a story. Isn't that great?
Awesome.
That's
That's awesome. And a shout out to his granddaughter, Lauren. I love her. I love Lauren.
Okay, final question, Larry.
Yep.
An embarrassing thing or story that nobody else knows about you, or very few people know about you.
Oh boy. Well, there was something that I did that was really quite embarrassing. That turned out to be popular, but I was later on. It was sort of a shame I did it. When I was at Q104, we were playing easy listening music, and the world was changing, and we were playing, the instrumental songs of the Beatles, the instrumental songs of Phil Collins, and etc. And so we started to play vocals, and they came up with an idea. They said, "Now, Larry, you're known as a rock and roll guy, but you've been playing easy listening music, and now people see you as in a suit and a white shirt and tie. We need to change that." So we've come up with an idea. We're going to send you out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to cut a TV commercial. This television commercial starts off with me in a kitchen, and I'm sitting here with a blender, and I'm saying, "Hi, this is Larry Morrow and at Q104," because it was easy 104 before. "This is Larry Morrow at Q104, and do you know that we've changed? As a matter of fact, we now play Neil Diamond," and I would take the CD and put it in the blender. And we play the Beatles, and we put it in the blender. We play Phil Collins. We play Jimi Hendrix and put it in the blender. And we also play Madonna. And then I turn the blender on, and it goes around, and I take a sip of the blender. And the next thing you know, the next thing you see is the screen blows up. And I come back dressed as Madonna. With a wig, eyebrows, and the tassels on the breast. Spin.
We got to get a picture of that.
Spin Q104. And did it work? You bet. We went from being easy listening to Q104, and we went to the number 2 station in town overnight. Overnight. And now it was they asked me to do another one, and because the reaction to that to my friends was, "I can't believe you did that." And I felt embarrassed that I did it. And then when it came time to do another, I told the manager of WQAL at the time, I said, "I can't do it. I'm not going to do the second version of Madonna." And he said, "Well, no, Larry," I said, "I don't think you understand. You work for us." And I said, "No, I don't. I work for the people who listen to this radio station, and I'm not going to do it." And I didn't do it. But there were probably more.
Right.
But off the top of my head, Alex,
that's awesome.
I think that was probably pretty embarrassing.
That's a great one.
And my Christian friends saw that and thought, "I can't believe that Larry did that." And so I never did another.
All right, Larry. So we are going to wrap it up. That was a great interview. Thank you so much for coming out.
Is there a website people can visit you on?
Yeah. They can go to my website, just as Larry at LarryMorrow.com.
Okay.
So not much about radio, but there are a lot of really good pictures in there of the people whom I have interviewed, many of some of which we've talked about today. But it's really a leadership website. I'm changing it right now, but it'll still be about leadership and teaching.
And
My days of radio and television are really behind me.
Get the book.
This is Larry Morrow.
This is Larry Morrow.
I
Anything
feel like
coming up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
Anything coming up? that we should know
Yeah.
about?
I can tell you. Do you have another minute?
Yes.
Okay. Now we fast forward from Shania Twain not recording The Gift of America. So about, when was it? I think about 6 months ago or so, I've decided to bring The Gift of America back. And so I thought, it really is a good song. And I think, and now people love our veterans again. So here's my idea, and I'm in full force with it. As I used to say when I was a young rock and roll broadcaster, I'm in full tilt boogie now. So,
Oh boy.
so I am connecting the past to the present, if you will, and here's what I want to have happen on November the 11th, which is Veterans Day 2018. I would like to have 1 million people in front of the Lincoln Memorial who have had a member of their family in the armed forces to stand in front of the Lincoln Memorial with a picture on their chest of their loved one, singing to as many veterans as I can find on Veterans Day, singing "You're the Gift of America."
Wow.
That's my new goal.
Wow, that's a pretty big goal.
And
Larry.
I've run it by the veterans community, the veterans people. I've run it by several people whom I think are really pretty good in terms of you can get this done. And
I'm sure
and so,
Bob Royer's in that list.
Yeah. Oh yes. And I've put my committee together, and on that committee are people from the USO, from the Veterans Administration, some Marine Corps pals, and I'm very excited about it.
Cool.
That is my coup de grace, if you will, and I'm hopeful of it. And someone said, Larry, where are you going to get the money to do this? I said, well, first of all, I can reach by social media. I can reach the world in a second.
Absolutely.
And I have friends who have connections with people who care about veterans, and so they'll pay for it.
That would be. I think November 11th, 2018 is is that the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, which is when Veterans Day was started?
Absolutely.
So wouldn't that be the 100th anniversary of Veterans Day?
Yes.
Wow.
So that would be a good opportunity to get 1 million people to D.C.
I'm in.
Yeah.
So that's my.
Well, thank you.
That's
This
fascinating.
was-
I
this
feel
was
like an
amazing.
imposter, though, interviewing. We're just such rookies,
I was
Molly.
in
We're such.
awe.
We're interviewing one of the greats. I keep thinking, Larry, you must be looking at us like you guys have no clue how to ask questions.
Oh no! Are you kidding? Oh
well,
no!
Fortunately,
Oh,
you're so
no.
good at giving answers. You made it easy to. I don't know.
Well, you know, someone said, "When are you going to stop?" And I said, "I think you're always in forward motion."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah, I think you're always in forward motion, and so I have been blessed. I have been blessed greatly, and so what else can I give back? You know.
You're awesome. You're an inspiration.
Yeah,
So, folks, that was amazing. Thanks for listening. You should go immediately to Stitcher and iTunes and subscribe to this website. Subscribe to this podcast, which is the best podcast ever. That's what it's called, Larry. Do you know that? Best Podcast Ever is the name of it. Yeah, you should. Do you think you could say, can we get,
Yes.
is it
say whatever
audacious?
you want me to say.
Well, I think we want you to
The
say,
best podcast ever.
yeah. However, if you were introducing this podcast called Best Podcast Ever, how would you introduce it?
I would say, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon. You're about to listen to the best podcast ever recorded.
Stop it.
That would be it.
That was
We're using that one.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Do we need to sign anything, Larry? Can we have rights to that 4 seconds right there?
No, great.
Thank you so much, Larry. And so Stitcher, iTunes, or you can go to the website thebestpodcastever.com and subscribe there. Tell all your friends. And one day, Molly, just one day, we may be a fraction as good as Larry Morrow.
I doubt you're probably that good now.
Good Lord.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So much.
And Alex and Molly, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. That was
Have a nice
fantastic.
day.
Thanks.